Welcome back to the EBC's Brain Talks podcast. I'm Sam Polly, and it's a pleasure to be hosting this series of podcasts exploring the diverse innovations taking place right now in the brain community. Today, we're going to be focusing on neuroscience in Africa and the work being done to bring together research, as well as how the African neuroscience community has come together to identify challenges and opportunities in the region, to explore possible solutions, and to discover unique and important avenues for research. To tell us more, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Mahmoud Bukar Maina, a research fellow in neuroscience at the University of Sussex and a team leader at the Biomedical Science Research and Training Centre at Yobe State University, Nigeria. From the board of IBRO, Africa Regional Committee, and Secretary General of SONA, the Society of Neuroscientists of Africa, Professor Sadiq Yusuf. And from the European Brain Council, Frederick Destrebeck, the Executive Director. Thank you all so much for being with us today, and a very warm welcome to the three of you. Thank you. Sadiq, perhaps I could start with you, and maybe you could just very briefly paint us a quick picture of the situation in Africa today, the neuroscience position in Africa today. What are the challenges and opportunities, and also what makes Africa different from other regions?
Thank you very much for inviting me for this podcast, and I'm very happy to be with you guys. Neuroscience in Africa, outside the poor funding, unreliable power supply, difficulty in importing materials, reagents, equipment to do research, African participation in international conferences by African neuroscientists is most of the time also wholly obstructed by poor funding and visa issues. And some of these problems actually hamper development of neuroscience in Africa. Apart from that, African, looking at the population of Africa and the people, we have very few neuroscience institutes where we can train people adequately. So the problem of poor funding or reliable power supply, few neuroscience institutes. This has actually hampered development of personal growth and development in the continent. And also because of the problems Africans face in getting out, it also hamper personal contacts or collaborations with other European or international collaborators, except for a few people who are lucky to have grants, and these are far in between. Okay, so there is complete absence of research labs that you can do meaningful research to solve problems that which we face in Africa. We have people. Africa is made up of about over 2 billion people. But yet, if you look at the distribution of research institutes, neuroscience institutes in Africa, you mostly find them in North Africa, maybe in Egypt and Morocco, South Africa, and a few others in Nigeria. But majority of the continent lack research institutes, even though we have the people.
Let me bring Fred in because, in fact, you mentioned that one of the problems is this hampering of collaboration efforts with other partners as well. And I suspect that Fred might want to respond to that too. So, Fred, let me ask you, as well as that, are there any similarities or differences that you see that you'd like to highlight? And maybe you could talk about that collaboration aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, thank you, Sam. This actually enables me to emphasize the relationship that EBC has established with IBRO as a member organizations, and which is extremely important as we speak, in the sense that, I mean, obviously in Europe, we have developed ways of collaborations between countries and EU member states where, the collaboration has been institutionalized in a sense that support and grants and funding was made available. Hence, the importance of the activities of an organization like EBC, bringing together the community. And as we speak, EBC is coordinating a project aiming at developing the shared European brain research agenda for the future. So setting out the priorities that, let's say, the funding of by EU institutions, particularly the European Commission, but also the governments of the various countries, what priorities they should actually go for. And in doing so, we were convinced that there is this saying that the brain is complex enough that it takes the world to crack and understand neuroscience. So establishing collaborations at the global level was, I would say, a natural next step after this consultation process. So this is definitely something we are about to engage into in the context of the Brain Innovation Days, but also in the context of the finalization of this project.
So, Mahmoud, let me bring you in because you've been working on a 5-year project, which began, I think, in 2016, to bring together previous research. Can you tell us a little bit about what your motivation for doing this was and what you've actually been doing?
Thank you very much, Sam, for having me here today. So, I was born and raised in Nigeria, and in 2011, I went out to the UK for my master's degree in neuroscience. So actually, going there was an eye opener for me because I saw how actual research could be done in a different continent, though. So coming back to Nigeria, I then started thinking about all these different things. Obviously, going through my undergraduate degree, like Professor Sadiq mentioned, there are a lot of challenges. Basic equipment is a problem. We don't really have the traditional style PI focusing on addressing specific research questions because of the lack of funding, lack of networks, and a lot of different things. But then one of the key things that really motivated this work was the fact that usually what you see is that when talking about neuroscience research on a global scale, when I came to the UK, I realized people talk about African, research as well as neuroscientists that are Black or from African publishing, but oftentimes that is masked by the fact that the actual research or some of the actual research is not done within the African continent. And if you really want to solve a problem, you need to identify the real problem and you need to have a data that really speaks of this problem. So I thought that one of the best ways to address this problem is to have that actual data that speaks about the state of neuroscience in Africa. Where are we? Where are we heading to? What are we lacking to head to that direction? So to address that, we collected a number of articles, about 12,500 articles from PubMed that have been published from 1996 to 2017. And then kind of as a comparison, we collected about 220 articles, 10 articles per year from United Kingdom, United States, Japan, Australia, and Brazil. And then we went into these articles to really look at where the actual work was conducted. And this is really, really important because I could be from Nigeria, but because probably I'm now affiliated with Sussex, I'll publish a work with my Nigerian affiliation and Sussex affiliation. And if someone was to look at that article, they could say, oh, you know what, this work was actually partly done in Nigeria. And actually, that's not the case. So we really need to dissect where a work was done, what aspect of that was done within Africa. That will now give us the data to actually say this is a state of infrastructure, state of funding within the continent. So to do that, I recruited a team of nearly 20 postdoctoral, PhD, and MSc students from different African countries, some within and outside the continent. Then we went into each article looking at the perhaps auto list, materials and method, acknowledgement to now confirm whether a work was actually done within a particular African country. And we went forward into categorizing that to each country. This really led to about 50 or 40 to 50 to 40% of the articles being taken out entirely as not being done within the African continent. And by comparing this with the work being done outside the continent from the other countries, we were then able to now make comparisons on a global scale.
And we'll ask you in a moment more about the findings. But beforehand, let me ask you, Sadiq, and bring you back in. As far as you're aware, has anything similar to this been done before? And how important do you think this work is, this sort of work that Mahmoud's been carrying out?
Yeah, thank you. This is the first time a group is attempting to actually dissect the neuroscience publications that is coming out of Africa. Because, just like Mahmoud said, majority of Africans who are lucky to go out like Mahmoud to do some real work, they publish this work along with the institute affiliation. So there's this erroneous belief that this work was done in Africa. So I'm really glad that Mahmoud and his group were able to do this, just to break out the point that yes, when we ask for funding or we ask for opportunities, you don't want to use, but Africa is doing great science. We have great population coming up from Africa. So why are you saying that you lack equipment, you lack technological know-how and all that? But so this work Mahmoud and his group are doing is actually very, very important, and SONA heavily supported. I think now people are beginning to see that the research that are coming out from African scientists who are resident in Africa, majority of the work is not actually done in Africa. It's done outside the continent. So this work is actually very, very important, and SONA support it greatly.
Yeah, Mahmoud, if I may, I mean, this project seems extremely ambitious. Can you maybe comment on the challenges that you faced in running the project?
Yeah, I mean, there are many challenges, and I think to save time, I'll probably just mention the key ones. One of the key challenge was the fact that it's not funded. So the work was not actually funded, and you can imagine analyzing, over 12,000 articles going into this is a lot of work. Um, and then the second major challenge is the fact that all of us have our own work as a main project. So we need to now spare some time to do that, and we need to do it diligently, going into the articles, confirming this was done within Africa and everything. And we don't want to publish something that is not accurate. So this is one of the reasons why we brought in a huge number of people in the team, and we wanted to even have more, so that at least more than two people can analyze and vet what the other person has done. But even at that, one of the major challenge you would see is sometimes the definition of the criteria can be perceived a little bit differently by one of the researchers than the others. So I think after 2016, after working for a year, we had to go back again to scratch to take out some of the things that were not correct, to now introduce new criteria and new kind of questions that we wanted to ask. So that was a very big challenge. And if we had a better way of doing this with machine learning and everything, that would have been great. But these two key things, I think, were the major challenges.
And you just mentioned briefly it, but was technology important in the project? Were you able to use technology to help and assist you?
Absolutely a big problem from two directions. One direction is the fact that how do we even have access to the articles? African researchers, the paywall, publications, you can't really have access to them. And we actually want to highlight something that is critical, which will support or give kind of good direction for the publication landscape as well. It was a big problem. So, often the researchers had to ask people like me or other people from outside the continent to send them an article that they cannot access. So you see, that is a technological problem. And then even at that, downloading some of the articles in some places, internet is a big issue, And then after that, because of the challenges with electricity, a project that myself would probably finish within one day, it would take up to a week for someone down there. But perhaps one of the, greatest challenge is to do with how we do the sorting. ID, we're talking about machine learning and everything, nowadays. It would have been great for us to apply that in our work, because think about what we did. We went through the auto list, materials and method, acknowledgement to try to pick out whether a work was actually done within the African continent. And I know that there are a number of databases trying to select PubMed. If you search in a person by his affiliation, you could see all these different articles. But again, the challenge is that they could pick an article with an African affiliation, even if the work was not done there. So I think the machines are not smart enough at the moment to be able to really pinpoint whether something was actually done. That was why we needed to do it ourselves. At the moment, we had a conversation with an expert in that area, and we were thinking that if we want to do something, a review after a number of years, how can we use these new technological approaches to address that? Whether we can do that or not, I don't know.
Mhm. And Mahmoud, what were the key findings of the study?
So again, the article is there published in Nature Communications, but there are a lot of different key findings, but I'll summarize some of these. So the first thing is we were able to map out which areas of key interest is research happening within the continent. And one of the key areas we discovered is the area of neurodegeneration and injury. So a lot of African countries, almost all, that is the hotspot, neurodegeneration and injury. And you would start to wonder if, let's say, Alzheimer's and other diseases are not as prevalent right now in Africa as other places. Why are we having high level of research in this area? But of course, apart from that, we also looked at which key areas or which key countries are producing more outputs within the continent, thereby enabling us to now map out that different countries are kind of in different development milestones. For example, South Africa is clearly leading the way alongside Egypt in these areas, but places like West Africa are really, really kind of behind. For example, Nigeria has one of the highest number of neuroscientists, but we discovered that over that 20-year period, only one article was published in a top tier journal above impact factor of 7, I think, from Nigeria, which is really disturbing. We also looked at the issue of citations and journal impact factors. We realized that a kind of compared to the global north, and here when we say global north, I'm talking about Japan, UK, United States, and Australia. So compared to them, the citations and where papers are published are completely opposite. In the global north, citations clearly up there, journal impact factor up there, but in African papers, especially in West Africa, not much citation, and the impact factor is very low where the papers are published. Within Africa, you could kind of say that South Africa and Brazil seem to have a similar level of citation and perhaps to some extent journal impact factor, publishing. So based on that, we kind of summarize that these different regions within Africa are at different development milestones, and it's therefore very important for example, funding, to know that the situation there is heterogeneous, not homogeneous. You cannot apply the same level of support to, let's say, South Africa as you would apply to Nigeria or West Africa, for example. And then we also looked at the issue of co-authorships. Where are these and how is that influencing citations and other things like that? We realized that a lot of these, when a paper has a lot of authors collaboration, obviously it ends up being more cited. But then we made a very important discovery, which is that the collaboration even within Africa is less compared to collaboration between African country and outside African country. And within African country, there seems to be a collaboration more between, let's say, Nigeria and South Africa, or another country and South Africa, than between countries even within the same region. And our conclusion to this basically is that the researchers are looking up to where there is more resource for doing research. South Africa is clearly doing great, and therefore most people will want to go there. And then if they have opportunity of collaborating with outside South Africa, then that would be great. But collaboration within the continent itself, let's say Nigeria and Ghana, is really, really lacking. And I think we need that to grow this discipline going forward. And then finally, which is really, really critical, or maybe the fourth point before the final point, is the issue of funding. We realize that for all the regions except Southern Africa, there is more international funding than domestic funding. But in the case of South Africa, there is more funding from South Africa than international funding. And clearly, based on our data, like South Africa is doing really, really great. What this tells us, therefore, is that if you want to create a sustainable and viable neuroscience within the continent, you want domestic funding either to be more than international, or at least they should be at the same level. Otherwise, that might not really work. And finally, we looked at the types of the research infrastructure, techniques, and perhaps the model systems used, and we realized, or we found, that the techniques or research infrastructure is barely existing. With the exception of the Gambia, mostly papers coming from the MRC unit in the Gambia, all other countries, about less than probably 5%, or in some countries 1% of the papers use advanced techniques. And here we're talking about techniques like confocal microscopy, PCR, Western blotting. These are techniques that are common in the global north, but in Africa they are barely existing. Of course, in Southern Africa that is there, but in the bulk of Africa that is lacking. And in terms of model systems, we realize that across the continent there is barely the use of transgenic model systems. Let's say transgenic mice, transgenic fruit flies, or rat. They are barely existing, which means that most researchers are using wild type animals for their research. And finally, we also looked at medicinal plant use, because Africa is one of the key places where medicinal plants are used for treatment of diseases for centuries, and therefore researchers usually look at this to try to address research questions. And we realize that there's a lot of work, especially in West Africa, using medicinal plants to address research questions, which is a strength here, because with funding, people could actually do good work that could result in drug discovery process. But like I said, there's a lot, and I cannot really exhaust those findings. But the paper is published in Nature Communications, and I'm pretty sure interested people can go there to see some of the other findings.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mahmoud. And I'd just like to pick up particularly on one point that you made about collaboration. And of course, this podcast is all leading up to the EBC's Brain Innovation Days. And that theme there is connecting brains. And you've been talking about that collaboration. So it's really very relevant. And I mentioned at the start of the podcast that the African neuroscience community has been coming together to look at the challenges and opportunities that exist in a series of Welcome, Trust African Neuroscience consultations and meetings. And Mahmoud, I will just ask you quickly in a moment how you were involved with that. But Sadiq, first of all, you must welcome this sort of collaboration.
Definitely, we do welcome it, because that's what we've actually been looking for all this while, where African scientists are connected to their counterparts outside Africa. And the kind of work Mahmoud is doing and the kind of work we have been doing, we're now looking at the possibility of bringing the labs to Africa. I mean, instead of going to Europe, for example, why don't you come to Africa and do the training? And after the training, leave your equipment behind. So those are the things we're now looking at, based on what Mahmoud and co have been doing. And IBRO, ISN, Wellcome Trust have been playing a very, very, very big role in this direction. So we welcome it a lot, yes.
I'm sure Fred will have something to comment on in just a moment, but just very, very briefly, Mahmoud, how did you get involved in these consultations and the meetings?
Yeah, so I think when we published our first paper in 2019, there was a lot of interest. It was published in the European Journal of Neuroscience. The tons of downloads, and in that year we had the SONA conference in Lagos. So around the same time, the Wellcome Trust has identified that African neuroscience is a key area that should be supported for the benefit of global neuroscience. And so it kind of, the work appeared almost at the same time. The Wellcome Trust was there. I engaged with Andrew Welchman around the same time. They administered a survey, and the survey findings kind of touch upon some of the findings that we published in the first paper and later on in the second paper. So based on that, the Wellcome Trust, the paper that we published actually now strengthened the Wellcome Trust kind of idea that this is definitely a direction the direction we are taking is actually a good one, and there is a data to support that. So I was invited to join the engagement process and made a co-chair for the engagement process, which really lasted for 2 years and eventually culminating to a conference. After the conference, we had a series of facilitated workshops with people from within Africa and outside Africa, as well as other funders, which led to so many exciting findings that were recently published in eLife.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, Mahmoud, Sadiq, I just wanted to comment on the fact that, I mean, obviously the work of coordination that we have been running in Europe resonates so much with what SONA has initiated, all these meetings, workshops, and this conference in Lagos. And it really demonstrates how this work of bringing everyone together or bringing the community together is an essential first step. But I was curious to know what came out of the meetings that were organized under the aegis of SONA. Sadiq, maybe?
The meeting of the meeting that you had, that's the meeting Mahmoud talked about. Mahmoud, the meeting after your publication, right? I don't know which meeting you're talking about.
Yeah,
I think it was the Wellcome Trust African one.
yes.
So it's maybe Mahmoud is maybe better.
Yeah, no, I think Mahmoud is,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
better position.
So one of the key, so for that meeting, the meeting started at the team level where we had engagements and there were representation from all regions of Africa. And the engagements was first to identify what are the problems and how do we go about addressing them. And we come up with the idea that we have to have a meeting, a conference where we have researchers from junior to senior academics join and present, as well as engage in brainstorming sessions to discuss the problems and the opportunities, as well as invite others outside Africa. That meeting was organized in November 2021, and the meeting identified 6 domains of distinctions of potential in neuroscience in Africa, which basically means that these are areas that would strengthen African neuroscience, but equally they are areas that will advance brain research on a global scale. And the first of these areas was diverse DNA of African populations. The meeting and obviously highlighted that Africa has the highest genetic diversity, and therefore, if there is more research in neuroscience on African population, there is a higher tendency of making discoveries that will be applicable to the global population. And one example is, for example, there are genes that could be a risk factors for certain diseases which might not be affecting Africans. And by researching Africans, you could actually therefore discover how other variants could help in development of therapies in other regions. And secondly, there was also the issue of diverse African fauna, and ecosystem. So, for example, there are a lot of medicinal plants in Africa, and African researchers are working in trying to kind of address research questions using those medicinal plants, leading to drug discoveries. Also, the animals in the African continent are so diverse, which can help us to understand some basic mechanisms related to neurosciences and how those can be used in modeling different diseases. And then thirdly, another area of distinction was child brain health and development. There are a lot of children in Africa, and understanding how their brain is affected in health and disease would help in advancing neuroscience on a global scale. The fourth was the issue of impact of climate change, environmental risks, and conflicts on neurological and mental health, because a lot of the African continent is affected by climate change, and also there are issues of conflicts and securities. It was identified that if actually there's a research happening on the kind of volunteers or population within the continent, it can actually result in better understanding on how climate change could affect other regions in the future, or how security and challenges and conflicts can affect neurological health both within and outside the continent. And finally, fifthly, we also identified that the clinical population within Africa are very, very unique. For example, if you want to run a clinical trial, doing that outside Africa is more challenging than if you want to do it within Africa. Recruitment of people will be easier. And obviously, it is sad to say, but a lot of people within Africa, for example, brain injuries are there. So if you want to do a clinical trial on those type of population, you can easily get access to them. And finally, there is the issue of innovation within the African continent. It was discussed that a lot of researchers are actually using innovative means to now address specific questions. For example, you could see a researcher in the global north using English to administer a particular questionnaire about, let's say, neurological health, but in reality, you cannot use the same English to get meaningful responses from a particular ethnic group within Africa. So African researchers had to develop, or some of them are developing, new mechanisms to understand or administer questionnaires that can give relevant answers. So these are the 6 domains of decision that was discovered, and then there were a lot of discussions about plans on how the field can be moved forward for the betterment of African neuroscience as well as the global neuroscience community.
Mahmoud, Sadiq, we're nearly out of time. So let me just ask you both very briefly, looking ahead from the data that you've brought together and the collaborations that we've just been talking about, what concrete action do you want to see happening next? I know one of the key aims was to influence policy. Maybe just sort of a key next step or two from you both would be really interesting. What would you like to see happening, Sadiq?
So first and foremost is to strengthen the curriculum of neuroscience in Africa. That's number one. So you train more people adequately. Then 2, with collaborations from organizations like IBRO, ISN, Wellcome Trust, and maybe Trend, organize more or less hands-on training within the African continent. Okay, and so all these things I'm talking about, train people to have the skills that they require to conduct research in Africa. And after that, we get access to funding to get this equipment down to Africa. For example, a confocal microscope in Europe, which no longer using, can be very, very useful to somebody in Africa. Get it down to Africa. And because you have trained them in Africa, they have access to the population, they have access to the plants or whatever remedy they be using. They can easily do this research now in Africa. So we'll be doing it now for the past 5 or 6 years in collaboration with IBRO, ISN, Wellcome Trust, and a few other people. So we'll be training people in Africa to see that all that Mahmoud is doing with his team will be able to be implemented in Africa. And we also think that the more people you train and the more they rise within the academia or the hierarchy, they will be able to influence policies. Okay, so if you're in a university and you were trained and you get your master's or PhD and becomes a dean or head of department, then you can influence things. So we think that is the way to go in order to achieve what we set out to achieve and do what Mahmoud and team are suggesting that we do. Mahmoud, I don't want to add.
Yeah. So
just very briefly.
Yeah. So I guess the 2 quick things that I add is Prof. Sadiq has mentioned the issue of training and other things, which is one component. Another component is to increase the number of funded research projects with African PIs. So I think funders need to think about how they can fund African PIs to do research and give them the money for the research as well as buying equipment. So that way, the person within the continent will buy those equipment and train people to use them, and other researchers also access them to do good science. And secondly, I think there is a need to either funders to increase funding initiatives that would increase intra-African collaboration or collaboration intra-Africa as well as outside Africa, whereby the funding has to be where you have a collaborator, let's say Nigeria, Ghana, and then another country. That will increase the crosstalk or communication within Africa. And the key thing, finally to mention is that I think we need to give African PIs kind of leadership in leading projects. In the past, we know that even in our analysis, we've seen that where European or global node PIs come into Africa, they do research, but then they only acknowledge the researchers. I think that is already changing, but it has to absolutely change. We need a situation where there is a mutual collaboration, where an African PI is given a leading role for aspect of project within Africa, that can begin to increase their visibility, their competence, and allow them to build infrastructure that can support research within the continent.
Before I ask you all for a final quick thought, Sadiq, maybe just very quickly, we've been talking about a lot of research work and bringing papers together, lots of collaboration, lots of sort of work that's really going on behind the scenes in a way. What difference does this work actually make for people who are living with neurological disorders?
Now, what it means is that we now know that there's a problem within the continent, and people are beginning to get interested. And what we now need to do is, like from the side of SONA, we're going to be requesting for funding to train more people in that direction, so that people can now participate more in research of brain disorders, which is a very, very big problem around here.
And let me just wrap up then before we finish with a final comment from you all. Before we finish, what would you say your vision and hope for the African region is in the light of the work we've been discussing? Mahmoud, I'll come to you first, then Sadiq, and we'll finish with Fred. So yeah, in a sentence or two, your vision and hope for the African region, given this fantastic work that's been taking place.
For me, I believe that African neuroscience is the next big thing on a global scale, simply because of the enormous diversity of flora, fauna, and many different opportunities within the continent. My vision is, if supported, I think the DNA of the African people can unlock a lot of different things that can help us address neurological diseases and understand ourselves better, how our brain works in different situations, and how that can inform even technological advancements.
Sadiq.
Yeah, my vision is to see that more Africans are trained and to increase collaboration between themselves. And that way, they'll be able to address local issues that pertains to them. So with what Mohammed is doing, if we can get more training to train more Africans, to give them more skills to remain in the continent, they should be able to address the problems that we see, and the world can learn from us.
Fred.
Well, I think what I could say from our European perspective was first, maybe we started this conversation. I was very much focused on the need for collaboration, cross-fertilization, potentially support on resources. We mentioned also infrastructure, but I've been really heartened by the discussion and the potential that such collaboration can actually bring in probably opening also our eyes as Westerners on issues, in particularly some topics on which I see your pioneering. I mean, we've been trying to promote the challenges linked with climate change, for instance, or the loss of biodiversity. And I think that here, Mahmoud, what you've been saying earlier for us is definitely things we should get really inspired from. So I'm really looking forward to a situation where we can be enlightened by this kind of pioneer work. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, it really has been fantastic to hear about so much about this work and the collaborations that have been taking place. But unfortunately, that is all that we've got time for today. But thank you, all three of you, for joining us on the Brain Talks podcasts. And thank you, everyone who's been listening or watching. Do join us again soon for another podcast as we look ahead to the Brain Innovation Days and continue to explore the brain in the life course. Until next time, bye-bye.